Immediately afterwards, Mullah Hussein proceeded to the caravanserai of Sabzi Maidan. He dismounted and, standing at the entrance of the inn, awaited the arrival of his companions. As soon as they had gathered and been accommodated in that place, he sent for bread and water. Those who had been commissioned to fetch them returned empty-handed, and informed him that they had been unable to procure either bread from the baker or water from the public square. "You have exhorted us," they told him, "to put our trust in God and to resign ourselves to His will. Nothing can befall us but what God has destined for us. Our liege Lord is He, and on God let the faithful trust." From the Quran 9:52. Mullah Hussein ordered that the gates of the caravanserai be closed. Assembling his companions, he begged them to remain gathered in his presence until the hour of sunset. As the evening approached, he asked whether any of them would be willing to arise and, renouncing his life for the sake of the faith, ascend to the roof of the caravanserai and sound the azan. A youth gladly responded. No sooner had the opening words of Allahu Akbar dropped from his lips than a bullet suddenly struck him and immediately caused his death. "Let another one among you arise," Mullah Hussein urged them, and, with the self-same renunciation, proceed with the prayer with which the youth was unable to finish. Another youth started to his feet, and had no sooner uttered the words, "I bear witness that Muhammad is the apostle of God," when he also was struck down by another bullet from the enemy. A third youth, at the bidding of his chief, attempted to complete the prayer which his martyred companions had been forced to leave unfinished. He too suffered the same fate. As he was approaching the end of his prayer and was uttering the words, "There is no God but God," he, in his turn, fell dead. The fall of the third companion decided Mullah Hussein to throw open the gate of the caravanserai and to arise, together with his friends, to repulse this unexpected attack from a treacherous enemy. Leaping upon horseback, he gave the signal to charge upon the assailants who had massed before the gates and had filled the Sabzi Maidan. Sword in hand and followed by his companions, he succeeded in decimating the forces that had been arrayed against him. Those who had escaped their swords fled before them in panic, again pleading for peace, again imploring mercy. With the approach of evening, the entire crowd had vanished. The Sabzi Maidan, which a few hours before overflowed with a seething mass of opponents, was now deserted. The clamour of the multitude was stilled. Bestrewn with the bodies of the slain, the Maidan and its surroundings offered a sad and moving spectacle, a scene which bore witness to the victory of God over his enemies. So startling a victory induced a number of the nobles and chiefs of the people to intervene and beseech the mercy of Mullah Hussein on behalf of their fellow citizens. They came on foot to submit to him their petition. "God is our witness," they pleaded, "that we harbour no intention but that of establishing peace and reconciliation between us. Remain seated on your charger for a while until we have explained our motive." Observing the earnestness of their appeal, Mullah Hussein dismounted and invited them to join him in the caravanserai. "We, unlike the people of this town, know how to receive the stranger in our midst," he said, as he invited them to be seated beside him, and ordered that they be served with tea. "The Sayyidul Ulama," they replied, "was alone responsible for having kindled the fire of so much mischief. The people of Baha'i should in no wise be implicated in the crime which he has committed. Let the past be now forgotten. We would suggest, in the interest of both parties, that you and your companions leave tomorrow for Amul. Baha'i is in the throes of great excitement. We fear lest they may again be instigated to attack you." Mullah Hussein, though hinting at the insincerity of the people, consented to their proposal. Whereupon Abbas Quli Khan-i Larijani and Haji Mustafa Khan arose together, and swearing by the Quran which they had brought with them, solemnly declared their intention to regard them as their guests that night, and the following day to instruct Khusro-i Qadi Kali, a footnote here says, a notorious scoundrel who often rebelled against the government, and 100 horsemen to ensure their safe passage through Shirgah. "The malediction of God and his prophets be upon us, both in this world and in the next," they added, "if we ever allow the slightest injury to be inflicted upon you and your party." As soon as they made their declaration, their friends, who had gone to fetch food for the companions and fodder for their horses, arrived. Mullah Hussein bade his fellow believers break their fast, inasmuch as none of them that day, which was Friday the 12th of the month of Dhul-Qa'dah, the 10th of October, AD 1848, had taken any meat or drink since the hour of dawn. So great was the number of notables and their attendants that had crowded into the caravanserai that day, that neither he nor any of his companions had partaken of the tea which they had offered to their visitors. That night, about 4 hours after sunset, Mullah Hussein, together with his friends, dined in the company of Abbas Quli Khan and Haji Mustafa Khan. In the middle of that same night, the Sayyidul Ulama summoned Khosrow-i Qadi and confidentially intimated to him his desire that, at any time or place he himself might decide, the entire property of the party which had been entrusted to his charge should be seized, and that they themselves, without a single exception, should be put to death. Are these not the followers of Islam? Khosrow observed. Have not these same people, as I have already learned, preferred to sacrifice 3 of their companions rather than leave unfinished the call to prayer which they had raised? How could we, who cherish such designs and perpetrate such acts, be regarded as worthy of that name? That shameless miscreant insisted that his orders be faithfully obeyed. Slay them, he said, as he pointed with his finger to his neck, and be not afraid. I hold myself responsible for your act. I will, on the day of judgment, be answerable to God in your name. We who wield the sceptre of authority are surely better informed than you, and can judge best how to best extirpate this heresy. At the hour of sunrise, Abbas Quli Khan asked that Khosrow be conducted into his presence, and bade him exercise the utmost consideration towards Mullah Hussein and his companions, to ensure their safe passage through Shirgah, and to refuse whatever rewards they might wish to offer him. Khosrow feigned submission to these instructions, and assured him that neither he nor his horsemen would relax in their vigilance or flinch in their devotion to them. On our return, he added, we shall show you his own written expression of satisfaction with the services we shall have rendered him. When Khosrow was taken by Abbas Quli Khan and Haji Mustafa Khan and the other representative leaders of Baha'i into the presence of Mullah Hussein and was introduced to him, the latter remarked, If ye do well, it will redound to your own advantage, and if ye do evil, the evil will return upon you. From the Quran 17:7. If this man should treat us well, great shall be his reward, and if he act treacherously towards us, great shall be his punishment. To God would we commit our cause, and to his will are we wholly resigned. Mullah Hussein spoke these words and gave the signal for departure. Once more Kambar Ali was heard to raise the call of his master. Mount your steeds, O heroes of God, a summons which he invariably called out on such occasions. At the sound of those words they all hurried to their steeds. A detachment of Khosrow's horsemen marched before them. They were immediately followed by Khosrow and Mullah Hussein, who rode abreast in the center of the company. In their rear followed the rest of the companions, and on their right and left marched the remainder of the 100 horsemen whom Khosrow had armed as willing instruments for the execution of his design. It had been agreed that the party should start early in the morning from Baha'i and arrive on the same day at noon at Shirgah. 2 hours after sunrise they started for their destination. Khosrow intentionally took the way of the forest, a route which he thought would better serve his purpose. As soon as they had penetrated it, he gave the signal for attack. His men fiercely threw themselves upon the companions, seized their property, killed a number, among whom was the brother of Mullah Sadiq, and captured the rest. As soon as the cry of agony and distress reached his ears, Mullah Hussein halted, and alighting from his horse protested against Khosrow's treacherous behavior. The hour of midday is long past, he told him. We still have not attained our destination. I refuse to proceed further with you. I can dispense with your guidance and company and that of your men. Turning to Kambar Ali, he asked him to spread his prayer mat, that he might offer his devotions. He was performing his ablutions when Khosrow, who had also dismounted, called one of his attendants and bade him inform Mullah Hussein that if he wished to reach his destination safely, he should deliver to him both his sword and his horse. Refusing to give a reply, Mullah Hussein proceeded to offer his prayer. Shortly after, Mirza Muhammad Taqi-i Juvaini-i Sabzivari, a man of literary accomplishments and fearless courage, went to an attendant who was preparing the Kalyan, and requested him to allow him to take it in person to Khosrow, a request that was readily granted. Mirza Muhammad Taqi was bending to kindle the fire of the kalyan, when, thrusting his hand suddenly into Khosrow's bosom, he drew his dagger from his robe and plunged it hilt deep into his vitals. Mullah Hussein was still in the act of prayer when the cry of Ya Sahibuz Zaman was raised again by his companions. They threw themselves upon their treacherous assailants, and in one onslaught struck them all down except the attendant who had prepared the kalyan. Affrighted and defenceless, he fell at the feet of Mullah Hussein and implored his aid. He was given the bejeweled kalyan which belonged to his master, and was bidden to return to Bafurush and recount to Abbas Quli Khan all that he had witnessed. "Tell him," said Mullah Hussein, "how faithfully Khosrow has discharged his mission. That false miscreant foolishly imagined that my mission had come to an end, that both my sword and my horse had fulfilled their function. Little did he know that their work had but just begun, that until the services which they can render are entirely accomplished, neither his power nor the power of any man beside him can wrest them from me." As the night was approaching, the party decided to tarry in that spot until the hour of dawn. At daybreak, after Mullah Hussein had offered his prayer, he gathered his companions together and said, "We are approaching Al-Kabila, our ultimate destination." Immediately after, he set out on foot towards that spot and was followed by his companions. Finding that a few were attempting to carry with them the belongings of Khosrow and of his men, he ordered them to leave everything behind except their swords and horses. "It behoves you," he urged them, "to arrive at that hallowed spot in a state of complete detachment, wholly sanctified from all that pertains to this world." A footnote here says, "Then turning to his companions, he said, 'During these few days of life which remains to us, let us beware not to be divided and estranged by perishable riches. Let all this be held in common, and let everyone share in its benefits.'" The Babis agreed with joy, and it is this marvelous spirit of self-sacrifice and this complete self-abnegation which made their enemies say that they advocated collective ownership in earthly goods and even women. From A.L.M. Nicholas's Syed Ali Muhammad Dit Lebab, page 299. He had walked the distance of a maidan when he arrived at the shrine of Sheikh Tabasi. The Sheikh had been one of the transmitters of the traditions ascribed to the imams of the faith, and his burial place was visited by the people of the neighborhood. On reaching that spot, he recited the following verse of the Quran: "O my Lord, bless thou my arrival at this place, for thou alone canst vouchsafe such blessings." The night preceding their arrival, the guardian of the shrine dreamed that the Sayyidush Shuhada, the Imam Hussein, had arrived at Sheikh Tabasi, accompanied by no less than 72 warriors and a large number of his companions. He dreamed that they had tarried on that spot, engaged in the most heroic of battles, triumphing in every encounter over the forces of the enemy, and that the Prophet of God himself arrived one night and joined that blessed company. When Mullah Hussein arrived on the following day, the guardian immediately recognized him as the hero he had seen in his vision, threw himself at his feet, kissed him devoutly. Mullah Hussein invited him to be seated by his side and heard him relate his story. "All that you have witnessed," he assured the keeper of the shrine, "will come to pass. Those glorious scenes will again be enacted before your eyes." That servant threw in his lot eventually with the heroic defenders of the fort, and fell a martyr within its walls. On the very day of their arrival, which was the 14th of Dhul-Qa'dah, 12th of October, AD 1848, Mullah Hussein gave Mirza Muhammad Baqir, who had built the Baha'i, the preliminary instructions regarding the design of the fort which was to be constructed for their defense. Towards the evening of the same day, they found themselves suddenly encompassed by an irregular multitude of horsemen, who had emerged from the forest and were preparing to open fire upon them. "We are the inhabitants of Qadi Kala," they shouted. "We come to avenge the blood of Khosrow. Not until we have put you all to the sword shall we be satisfied." Besieged by a savage crowd ready to pounce upon them, the party had to draw their swords again in self-defense. Raising the cry of "Ya Sahibuz Saman," they leaped forward, repulsed the assailants, and put them to flight. So tremendous was the shout that the horsemen vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. Mirza Muhammad Taqi Juveni had, at his own request, assumed the command of that encounter. Fearing that their assailants might again turn on them and resort to a general massacre, they pursued them until they reached a village which they thought to be the village of Qadi Kala. At the sight of them, all the men fled in wild terror. The mother of Nazar Khan, the owner of the village, was inadvertently killed in the darkness of the night amid the confusion that ensued. The outcries of the women, who were violently protesting that they had no connection whatever with the people of Qadi Kala, soon reached the ears of Mirza Muhammad Taqi, who immediately ordered his companions to withhold their hands until they ascertained the name and character of the place. They soon found out that the village belonged to Nazar Khan, and that the woman who had lost her life was his mother. Greatly distressed at the discovery of so grievous a mistake on the part of his companions, Mirza Muhammad Taqi sorrowfully exclaimed, "We did not intend to molest either the men or women of this village. Our sole purpose was to curb the violence of the people of Qadi Kala, who were about to put us all to death." He apologized earnestly for the pitiful tragedy which his companions had unwittingly enacted. Nazar Khan, who in the meantime had concealed himself in his house, was convinced of the sincerity of the regrets expressed by Mirza Muhammad Taqi. Though suffering from this grievous loss, he was moved to call upon him and invite him to his home. He even asked Mirza Muhammad Taqi to introduce him to Mullah Hussein, and expressed a keen desire to be made acquainted with the precepts of a cause that could kindle such fervor in the breasts of its adherents. At the hour of dawn, Mirza Muhammad Taqi, accompanied by Nazar Khan, arrived at the shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi, and found Mullah Hussein leading the congregational prayer. Such was the rapture that glowed upon his countenance, that Nazar Khan felt an irresistible impulse to join the worshippers and to repeat the very prayers that were then falling from their lips. After the completion of that prayer, Mullah Hussein was informed of the loss which Nazar Khan had sustained. He expressed in the most touching language the sympathy which he and the entire company of his fellow disciples felt for him in his great bereavement. "God knows," he assured him, "that our sole intention was to protect our lives rather than disturb the peace of the neighborhood." Mullah Hussein then proceeded to relate the circumstances that had led to the attack directed against them by the people of Barfarush, and explained the treacherous conduct of Khusro. He again assured him of the sorrow which the death of his mother had caused him. "Afflict not your heart," Nazar Khan spontaneously replied. "Would that 100 sons had been given me, all of whom I would have joyously placed at your feet, and offered as a sacrifice to the Sahib-uj Saman." He pledged that very moment his undying loyalty to Mullah Hussein, and hastened back to his village in order to return with whatever provisions might be required for the party. Mullah Hussein ordered his companions to commence the building of the fort which had been designed. To every group he assigned a section of the work, and encouraged them to hasten its completion. In the course of these operations they were continually harassed by the people of the neighboring villages, who, at the persistent instigations of the Sayyidul Ulama, marched out and fell upon them. Every attack of the enemy ended in failure and shame. Undeterred by the fierceness of their repeated onslaughts, the companions valiantly withstood their assaults until they had succeeded in subjugating temporarily the forces which had hemmed them in on every side. When the work of construction was completed, Mullah Hussein undertook the necessary preparations for the siege which the fort was destined to sustain, and provided, despite the obstacles which stood in his way, whatever seemed essential for the safety of its occupants. The work had scarcely been completed when Sheikh Abu Turab arrived, bearing the news of Baha'u'llah's arrival at the village of Nazar Khan. He informed Mullah Hussein that he had been specially commanded by Baha'u'llah to inform them that they all were to be his guests that night, and that he himself would join them that same afternoon. I have heard Mullah Mirza Muhammad-i Farooqi recount the following. The tidings which Sheikh Abu Turab brought imparted an indefinable joy to the heart of Mullah Hussein. He hastened immediately to his companions and bade them bestir themselves for the reception of Baha'u'llah. He himself joined them in sweeping and sprinkling with water the approaches to the shrine, and attended in person to whatever was necessary for the arrival of the beloved visitor. As soon as he saw him approaching with Nazar Khan, he rushed forward, tenderly embraced him, and conducted him to the place of honor which he had reserved for his reception. We were too blind in those days to recognize the glory of him whom our leader had introduced with such reverence and love into our midst. What Mullah Hussein had perceived, our dull vision was as yet unable to recognize. With what solicitude he received him in his arms, what feelings of rapturous delight filled his heart on seeing him. He was so lost in admiration that he was utterly oblivious of us all. His soul was so wrapped in contemplation of that countenance that we, who were awaiting his permission to be seated, were kept standing a long time beside him. It was Baha'u'llah himself who finally bade us be seated. We too were soon made to feel, however inadequately, the charm of his utterance, though none of us were even dimly aware of the infinite potency latent in his words. Baha'u'llah, in the course of that visit, inspected the fort and expressed his satisfaction with the work that had been accomplished. In his conversation with Mullah Hussein, he explained in detail such matters as were vital to the welfare and safety of his companions. The one thing this fort and company require, he said, is the presence of Qudus. His association with this company would render it complete and perfect. He instructed Mullah Hussein to dispatch Mullah Midi-i-Kui with 6 people to Sari, and to demand of Mirza Muhammad Taqi that he immediately deliver Qudus into their hands. The fear of God and the dread of his punishments, Baha'u'llah assured Mullah Hussein, will prompt him to surrender unhesitatingly his captive. Ere he departed, Baha'u'llah enjoined them to be patient and resigned to the will of God. If it be his will, he added, we shall once again visit you at the same spot, and shall lend you our assistance. You have been chosen of God to be the vanguard of his host and the establishers of his faith. His host verily will conquer. Whatever may befall, victory is yours, a victory which is complete and certain. With these words, he committed those valiant companions to the care of God, and returned to the village with Nazar Khan and Sheikh Abu Turab. From thence he departed by way of Nur to Tehran. Mullah Hussein set out immediately to carry out the instructions he had received. Summoning Mullah Mihdi, he bade him proceed together with 6 other companions to Sari, and ask that the Mujtahid liberate his prisoner. As soon as the message was conveyed to him, Mirza Muhammad Taqi unconditionally acceded to their request. The potency with which that message had been endowed seemed to have completely disarmed him. I have regarded him, he hastened to assure the messengers, only as an honored guest in my house. It would be unbecoming of me to pretend to have dismissed or released him. He is at liberty to do as he desires. Should he wish it, I would be willing to accompany him. Mullah Hussein had in the meantime apprised his companions of the approach of Qudus, and had enjoined them to observe towards him a reverence such as they would feel prompted to show to the Bab himself. As to myself, he added, you must consider me as his lowly servant. You should bear him such loyalty that if he were to command you to take my life, you would unhesitatingly obey. If you waver or hesitate, you will have shown your disloyalty to your faith. Not until he summons you to his presence must you in any wise venture to intrude upon him. You should forsake your desires and cling to his will and pleasure. You should refrain from kissing either his hands or his feet, for his blessed heart dislikes such evidences of reverent affection. Such should be your behavior, that I may feel proud of you before him. The glory and authority with which he has been invested must need be duly recognized by even the most insignificant of his companions. Whoso departs from the spirit and letter of my admonitions, a grievous chastisement will surely overtake him. The incarceration of Qudus in the home of Mirza Muhammad Taqi, Sari's most eminent mujtahid, to whom he was related, lasted 95 days. Though confined, Qudus was treated with marked deference, and was allowed to receive most of the companions who had been present at the gathering of Badasht. To none, however, did he grant permission to stay in Sari. Whoever visited him was urged in the most pressing terms to enlist under the black standard hoisted by Mullah Hussein. It was the same standard of which Muhammad, the Prophet of God, had thus spoken, "Should your eyes behold the black standard proceeding from Khorasan, hasten ye towards them. even though ye should have to crawl over the snow, inasmuch as they proclaim the advent of the promised Mihdi, the vice-regent of God. That standard was unfurled at the command of the Bab, in the name of Qudus, and by the hands of Mullah Hussein. It was carried aloft all the way from the city of Mashhad to the shrine of Sheikh Tabasi. For 11 months, from the beginning of Shaban in the year AH 1264, the 3rd of July to the 1st of August AD 1848, to the end of Jamadiyuth Thani in the year AH 1265, the 24th of April to the 23rd of May AD 1849, that earthly emblem of an unearthly sovereignty waved continually over the heads of that small and valiant band, summoning the multitude who gazed upon it to renounce the world and to espouse the cause of God. While in Sari, Qudus frequently attempted to convince Mirza Muhammad Taqi of the truth of the divine message. He freely conversed with him on the most weighty and outstanding issues related to the revelation of the Bab. His bold and challenging remarks were couched in such gentle, such persuasive and courteous language, and delivered with such geniality and humour, that those who heard him felt not in the least offended. They even misconstrued his allusions to the sacred book as humorous observations intended to entertain his hearers. Mirza Muhammad Taqi, despite the cruelty and wickedness that were latent in him, and which he subsequently manifested by the stand he took in insisting upon the extermination of the remnants of the defenders of the fort of Sheikh Tabasi, was withheld by an inner power from showing the least disrespect to Qudus while the latter was confined in his home. He even was prompted to prevent the inhabitants of Sari from offending Qudus, and was often heard to rebuke them for the harm which they desired to inflict upon him. The news of the impending arrival of Qudus bestirred the occupants of the fort of Tabarsi. As he drew near his destination, he sent forward a messenger to announce his approach. The joyful tidings gave them new courage and strength. Roused to a burst of enthusiasm which he could not repress, Mullah Hussein started to his feet and, escorted by about 100 of his companions, hastened to meet the expected visitor. He placed 2 candles in the hands of each, lighted them himself, and bade them proceed to meet Qudus. The darkness of the night was dispelled by the radiance which those joyous hearts shed as they marched forth to meet their beloved. In the midst of the forest of Mazindaran, their eyes instantly recognized the face which they had longed to behold. They pressed eagerly around his steed, and with every mark of devotion paid him their tribute of love and undying allegiance. Still holding the lighted candles in their hands, they followed him on foot towards their destination. Qudus, as he rode along in their midst, appeared as the day star that shines amidst its satellites. As the company slowly wended its way towards the fort, there broke forth the hymn of glorification and praise, intoned by the band of his enthusiastic admirers. Holy, holy, the Lord our God, the Lord of the angels and the Spirit, rang their jubilant voices around him. Mullah Hussein raised the glad refrain, to which the entire company responded. The forest of Mazindaran re-echoed to the sound of their acclamations. In this manner they reached the shrine of Sheikh Tabasi. The first words that fell from the lips of Qudus after he had dismounted and leaned against the shrine were the following: "The Baqiyatullah will be best for you if ye are those who believe." Baqiyatullah, literally the remnant of God, which is a quotation from the Quran, 1185. By this utterance was fulfilled the prophecy of Muhammad as recorded in the following tradition: "And when the Mihdi is made manifest, he shall lean his back against the Kaaba and shall address to the 313 followers who will have grouped around him these words: The Baqiyatullah will be best for you if ye are those who believe." By Baqiyatullah, Qudus meant none other than Baha'u'llah. To this testified Mullah Mirza Muhammad-i Furuhi, who related to me the following: "I myself was present when Qudus alighted from his horse. I saw him lean against the shrine and heard him utter those same words. No sooner had he spoken them than he made mention of Baha'u'llah, and turning to Mullah Hussein, inquired about him. He was informed that unless God decreed to the contrary, he had signified his intention to return to this place before the first day of Muharram, which is the 27th of November, 1848. Shortly after, Qudus entrusted to Mullah Hussein a number of homilies, which he asked him to read aloud to his assembled companions. The first homily he read was entirely devoted to the Bab, the second concerned Baha'u'llah, and the third referred to Tahiri. We ventured to express to Mullah Hussein our doubts whether the references in the second homily were applicable to Baha'u'llah, who appeared clothed in the garb of nobility. The matter was reported to Qudus, who assured us that, God willing, its secret would be revealed to us in due time. Utterly unaware, in those days, of the character of the mission of Baha'u'llah, we were unable to understand the meaning of those allusions, and idly conjectured as to what could be their probable significance. In my eagerness to unravel the subtleties of the traditions concerning the promised Qaim, I several times approached Qudus, and requested him to enlighten me regarding that subject. Though at first reluctant, he eventually acceded to my wish. The manner of his answer, his convincing and illuminating explanations, served to heighten the sense of awe and of veneration which his presence inspired. He dispelled whatever doubts lingered in our minds, and such were the evidences of his perspicacity that we came to believe that to him had been given the power to read our profoundest thoughts and to calm the fiercest tumult in our hearts. Many a night I saw Mullah Hussein circle round the shrine within the precincts of which Qudus lay asleep. How often did I see him emerge in the mid-watches of the night from his chamber, and quietly direct his steps to that spot, and whisper the same verse with which we had all greeted the arrival of the beloved visitor. With what feelings of emotion I can still remember him as he advanced towards me in the stillness of those dark and lonely hours, which I devoted to meditation and prayer, whispering in my ears these words: "Banish from your mind, O Mullah Mirza Muhammad, these perplexing subtleties, and freed from their trammels, arise and seek with me to quaff the cup of martyrdom. Then will you be able to comprehend, as the year 80 dawns upon the world, the secret of the things which now lie hidden from you." A footnote here as to the mention of the year 80, reference to the year AH 1280, AD 1863-4, in which Baha'u'llah declared his mission in Baghdad. Qudus, on his arrival at the shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi, charged Mullah Hussein to ascertain the number of the assembled companions. One by one he counted them and passed them in through the gate of the fort, 312 in all. He himself was entering the fort in order to acquaint Qudus with the result, when a youth who had hastened all the way on foot from Bafarush suddenly rushed in and, seizing the hem of his garment, pleaded to be enrolled among the companions and to be allowed to lay down his life whenever required in the path of the beloved. His wish was readily granted. When Qudus was informed of the total number of the companions, he remarked, "Whatever the tongue of the Prophet of God has spoken concerning the promised one must needs be fulfilled, that thereby his testimony may be complete in the eyes of those divines who esteem themselves as the sole interpreters of the law and traditions of Islam. Through them will the people recognize the truth and acknowledge the fulfillment of these traditions." A footnote here says, "The assembling of 313 chosen supporters of the Imam of Taliq Khan of Khorasan is one of the signs that must needs herald the advent of the promised Qaim," from E.G. Brown's A History of Persian Literature in Modern Times, AD 1500 to 1924, page 399. Every morning and every afternoon during those days, Qudus would summon Mullah Hussein and the most distinguished among his companions and ask them to chant the writings of the Bab. Seated in the Maidan, the open square adjoining the fort and surrounded by his devoted friends, he would listen intently to the utterances of his master and would occasionally be heard to comment upon them. Neither the threats of the enemy nor the fierceness of their successive onsets could induce him to abate the fervour or break the regularity of his devotions. Despising all danger and oblivious of his own needs and wants, he continued, even under the most distressing circumstances, his daily communion with his beloved, wrote his praises of him, and roused to fresh exertions the defenders of the fort. Though exposed to the bullets that kept ceaselessly raining upon his besieged companions, he, undeterred by the ferocity of the attack, pursued his labours in a state of unruffled calm. "My soul is wedded to thy mention," he he was wont to exclaim. "Remembrance of thee is the stay and solace of my life. I glory in that I was the first to suffer ignominiously for thy sake in Shiraz. I long to be the first to suffer in thy path a death that shall be worthy of thy cause." He would sometimes ask his Iraqi companions to chant various passages of the Koran, to which he would listen with close attention, and would often be moved to unfold their meaning. In the course of one of their chantings they came across the following verse: "With somewhat of fear and hunger, and loss of wealth and lives and fruits, will we surely prove you, but bear good tidings to the patient." These words, Qudus would remark, were originally revealed with reference to Job and the afflictions that befell him. In this day, however, they are applicable to us, who are destined to suffer those same afflictions. Such will be the measure of our calamity that none but he who has been endowed with constancy and patience will be able to survive them. The knowledge and sagacity which Qudus displayed on those occasions, the confidence with which he spoke, and the resource and enterprise which he demonstrated in the instructions he gave to his companions, reinforced his authority and enhanced his prestige. These at first supposed that the profound reverence which Mullah Hussein showed towards him was dictated by the exigencies of the situation rather than prompted by a spontaneous feeling of devotion to his person. His own writings and general behavior gradually dispelled such doubts and served to establish him still more firmly in the esteem of his companions. In the days of his confinement in the town of Sari, Qudus, whom Mirza Muhammad Taqi had requested to write a commentary on the Suri of Ikhlas, better known as the Suri of Kul Huwallahul Ahad, composed in his interpretation of the Sa'd of Samad alone, a treatise which was thrice as voluminous as the Koran itself. That exhaustive and masterly exposition had profoundly impressed Mirza Muhammad Taqi, and had been responsible for the marked consideration which he showed towards Qudus, although in the end he joined the Sayyidul Ulama in compassing the death of the heroic martyrs of Sheikh Tabasi. Qudus continued, while besieged in that fort, to write his commentary on that Suri, and was able, despite the vehemence of the enemy's onslaught, to pen as many verses as he had previously written in Sari in his interpretation of that letter. The rapidity and copiousness of his composition, the inestimable treasures which his writings revealed, filled his companions with wonder and justified his leadership in their eyes. They read eagerly the pages of that commentary which Mullah Hussein brought to them each day, and to which he paid his share of tribute. The completion of the fort and the provision of whatever was deemed essential for its defense animated the enthusiasm of the companions of Mullah Hussein, and excited the curiosity of the people of the neighborhood. A few out of sheer curiosity, others in pursuit of material interest, and still others prompted by their devotion to the cause which that building symbolized, sought to be admitted within its walls and marveled at the rapidity with which it had been raised. Qudus had no sooner ascertained the number of its occupants than he ordered that no visitor be allowed to enter it. The praises which those who had already inspected the fort had lavished upon it were transmitted from mouth to mouth until they reached the ears of the Sayyidul Ulama, and kindled within his breast the flame of unrelenting jealousy. In his detestation of those who had been responsible for its erection, he issued the strictest prohibition against anyone's approaching its precincts, and urged all to boycott the companions of Mullah Hussein. Despite the stringency of his orders, a few were found to disregard his wishes, and to render whatever assistance was in their power to those whom he had so undeservedly persecuted. The afflictions to which these sufferers were subjected were such that at times they felt a distressing need of the bare necessities of life. In their dark hour of adversity, however, there would suddenly break upon them the light of divine deliverance, opening before their face the door of unexpected relief. The providential manner in which the occupants of the fort were relieved of the distress which weighed upon them fanned to fury the wrath of the willful and imperious Sayyidul Ulama. Impelled by an implacable hatred, he addressed a burning appeal to Nasir-ed-Din Shah, who had recently ascended the throne, and expatiated upon the danger with which his dynasty, nay, the monarchy itself, was menaced. The standard of revolt, he pleaded, has been raised by the contemptible sect of the Babis. This wretched band of irresponsible agitators has dared to strike at the very foundations of the authority with which your imperial majesty has been invested. The inhabitants of a number of villages in the immediate vicinity of their headquarters have already flown to their standard and sworn allegiance to their cause. They have built themselves a fort, and in that massive stronghold they have entrenched themselves, ready to direct a campaign against you. With unswerving obstinacy they have resolved to proclaim their independent sovereignty, a sovereignty that shall abase to the dust the imperial diadem of your illustrious ancestors. You stand at the threshold of your reign. What greater triumph could signalize the inauguration of your rule than to extirpate this hateful creed that has dared to conspire against you? It will serve to establish your majesty in the confidence of your people. It will enhance your prestige and invest your crown with imperishable glory. Should you vacillate in your policy, should you betray the least indulgence towards them, I feel it my duty to warn you that the day is fast approaching when not only the province of Mazindaran, but the whole of Persia from end to end will have repudiated your authority and will have surrendered to their cause. Nasir-ed-Din Shah, as yet inexperienced in the affairs of state, referred the matter to the officers who commanded the army of Mazindaran and who were in attendance upon him. He instructed them to take whatever means they deemed fit for the eradication of the disturbers of his realm. Haji Mustafa Khan-i-Turkaman submitted his views to his sovereign. I myself come from Mazindaran. I have been able to estimate the forces at their disposal. A handful of untrained and frail-bodied students whom I have seen are utterly powerless to withstand the forces which your majesty can command. The army which you contemplate dispatching is in my view unnecessary. A small detachment of that army will be sufficient to wipe them out. They are utterly unworthy of the care and consideration of my sovereign. Should your majesty be willing to signify your desire, in an imperial message addressed to my brother Abdullah Khan-i-Turkaman, that he should be given the necessary authorities to subjugate that band, I am convinced that he will, within the space of 2 days, quell their rebellion and shatter their hopes. The Shah gave his consent and issued his farman to that same Abdullah Khan, bidding him to recruit without delay from any part of his realm the forces he might require for the execution of his purpose. He sent with his message a royal badge, which he bestowed upon him as a mark of confidence in his capacity to undertake that task. The receipt of the imperial farman and the token of the honor which his sovereign had conferred upon him nerved him to fresh resolve to carry out his mission befittingly. Within a short space of time he had raised an army of about 12,000 men, composed largely of the Usanlu, the Afghan, and the Khudar communities. He equipped them with whatever ammunition was required and stationed them in the village of Afra, which was the property of Nazar Khan, and which commanded the fort of Tabasi. No sooner had he fixed his camp upon that eminence than he set out to intercept the bread which was being daily conveyed to the companions of Mullah Hussein. Even water was soon to be denied them, as it became impossible for the besieged to leave the fort under fire of the enemy.